I I always somehow manage to be itching when I start my podcast. Just waiting for a couple of people to pop on now. Hi, how are you? On this slightly bleak but clear day in Wales, in the UK. It's a reasonably nice day, and at least it's dry. So we're just waiting for a minute or so. Good morning, John. How are you? From sunny Gloucestershire. Oh, well, it's not sunny out here, but it's not raining. It's just sort of grey and overcast. But there we are. It's fine. That's the main point. We're going to be looking over the Book of Ruth today. We've just completed 2 sessions on the Book of Judges, so we're going to be looking over Ruth. Oh, that's nice. That's lovely. John says it's grey and overcast there, but when you're on, it's always sunny. That's lovely. Oh, that makes my heart beat faster. Flattery will get you nowhere. But, and a shameless plug today. You can see I've got my, I don't know whether you can actually read it. It's a band called Brightline, and hi Dwayne. Having trouble sleeping, but we'll be okay. That's fine if you drop off. I'm assuming you're in the States, but if you drop off, you can catch up if you fancy later. As I was saying, shameless plug for my daughter's band. My daughter's in a Christian band who travel up and down the country going to schools, and well, not at the moment, but in general they go to schools and play in prisons and things. And they're not metal, unfortunately. They're sort of indie pop, but it is well worth checking them out. They've got a good little roster of songs, all originals, and if you want to check them out without searching them down on YouTube, you can look at them on Sanctuary Wales YouTube site. Right, I'll shameless plug over. I always natter away about my daughter's band, but there we are. We'll get on to the subject at hand, the Book of Ruth. Ruth, as in our Bibles, is counted as a separate book, but originally Ruth and Judges were books together, and they still are in the Jewish Bible. The theme of no king in Israel was completed with the Book of Ruth. And as I said, the two books were originally together. You feel like you're coming into a breath of fresh air, as I said at the end of last time's podcast. After reading the Book of Judges, the Book of Judges is quite heavy and quite complex, and it ends with two horrendous stories, one about the tribe of Dan and one about the tribe of Benjamin. But in the Book of Ruth, you were in a totally different atmosphere altogether. We have moved 2 miles from the tribe of Benjamin to Bethlehem. First of all, the Book of Ruth has far fewer characters in it. More or less one family. Fewer places and far shorter number of years. And yet the Book of Ruth is the answer to the Book of Judges. And it quite often we read the Bible in snippets, and we don't actually read complete books. I'd recommend to read books. Trawling your way through Genesis is quite difficult, and Leviticus and what have you. I've gone through Genesis and Exodus, breaking it up into 20-minute sections, and giving you an overall picture of the books of Genesis and Exodus, again on Sanctuary Wales YouTube, and I'm about to start Leviticus the end of this week. But the Book of Ruth, as I said, is the answer to the Book of Judges, and you wouldn't as such understand that unless you'd read all the way through the Book of Judges, and you wouldn't get that if you didn't realise that they were combined together. There's quite a number of books in our Bible that have been separated, and that were not ever had the intention of being separated. 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, Judges and Ruth, and this is an essential part of reading the Bible, is that you get a sense of the story and the overall. You can see God working in the overall when you start reading complete books. And I know that's difficult for some people. It's difficult for me. I'm dyslexic and what have you. But I use audiobooks and I use a thing called what's it called? Digital Audio Bible. There's a guy called Brian who reads a section of the Bible 20 minutes every day, and I think I'm on my 3rd or 4th pass through the Bible that way, and I find that tremendous. I have a shower and brush my teeth and shave and what have you whilst Brian is on. My wife says I'm having an affair with Brian, but it's nothing like that. It's just I wake up and put that on. Anyway, the Book of Ruth. The Book of Ruth comes in 4 chapters. 2 inseparable women. It's about 2 inseparable women. A mother-in-law who has lost virtually everything, and a daughter-in-law's loyalty to her. And it also features 2 influential men, a redeemer kingsman who shows the woman love, and a royal king's line. Judges was a book that showed Saul's line of Benjamin to be bad, and Ruth shows the good line of David, and that's through Samuel. Let's go through the story. The opening paragraph, Ruth 1:1, opens with a marvelous economy of words, and it sets the stage. The characters are presented, and the situation is clear. Elimelech and Naomi and their 2 sons become refugees in an alien land, losing all their rights and status in fleeing from a famine which was in their land, a major disaster in their homeland. Mahlon and Chilion have a role to play in the story. Mahlon and Chilion are their 2 boys, and their names actually mean sick and ailing. Why you choose those as names, I don't know. As their names describe them, they are still paired against one another. Mahlon's name will survive through Ruth, and Chilion's will disappear from view. Whenever God's people go somewhere else looking for food, they tend to get into trouble. Naomi and her husband said, basically, let's go to Moab, and we'll cross the Jordan and go to the far side of Moab. And it was a fatal mistake. They went there, and both their sons married Moabite women, and things went from bad to worse. Even then, rabbinical imagination makes Orpah, Ruth's sister-in-law, who is actually the ancestor of Goliath, who we'll meet in the story of David. And it's interesting how God slips these little snippets of people in, going back through generations, and I just find it fascinating, and I absolutely love reading through the genealogies. I used to hate it. It used to be the bane of my life, reading through all these genealogies, but now I understand the process and the point of them. I'm really enjoying getting to learn about it, and doing these talks helps me learn, and I'm gaining more and more information all the time. I'll have forgotten it all by next week because of my head, but it's a great process to go through anyway. So Orpah is the ancestor of Goliath, who will meet Ruth's descendant David in the final confrontation of these branches of the family. Elimelech and his sons die, and the rabbis see the death as caused by leaving Canaan. In this, they touch on a clear theme within the book, the love for this rich land, a rich and sensuous feeling rising only out of the story and out of the loving description of the land at harvest time. So you basically see a family who have had a famine in their own land, going over to Moab. All sorts of chaos ensues there, and they hanker back for their land, and it's a story of going back. So the three widows are left alone, and a widow's lot in these days was pretty bad. Basically, if you got left a widow with nothing, then you had nothing carrying forward, and virtually nobody would help you. All this had stemmed from working out a human answer from this situation rather than asking God for his solution. And we constantly do that. We constantly are asking or are looking for a human solution when we should be looking for God's solution. God would have told them that the famine was part of God's punishment, and if they had turned back to him, they would have had enough food. But anyway, they went to Moab. And Naomi becomes very bitter. She's lost her husband and she's lost 2 sons. And the word Naomi actually means pleasure. But when she came back, she was almost unrecognizable to her old relatives. And she said to call herself Mara, which means bitter. So she actually opted to change her name, which reflected her bitterness. And she left Moab for Judea, and the 2 daughters-in-law said, we will come with you. She said, no, there's no way that you will get husbands in Judea. They don't marry outside the clan, so there's no way of getting husbands. And Orpah went back to Moab, but Ruth said, I will go with you. There's an inherent loyalty in Ruth that said, I'm going to stay with my mother-in-law. And Orpah made a choice, and she basically disappears out of God's eye. But Ruth also made a choice, and she went down in history as an ancestor of our Lord Jesus Christ. The text needs no embellishments. Entreat me not to leave you, or to return from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So we see here Ruth expounding on what she's willing to do for Naomi. And she must have had a great love for her mother-in-law. There's not a lot of women that would do this for their mother-in-law, but she must have had a great love for her mother-in-law and a great loyalty to her mother-in-law and their family. Because Ruth is leaving her home city of Moab, and she's willing to go wherever with Naomi. And Naomi's obviously going to go back home, and Ruth is going back there knowing that there's virtually no possibility of getting a husband, but she wants to stay with Naomi. Just one decision in your whole life can change everything, and this one decision in Ruth's life changed everything that she did. It's the choices that we make that make our character. And Ruth made the right choice at the right time. It was her choice that brought her into the line of God's purpose. And she became part of God's royal line. She was a woman and a Gentile. And normally women don't get put into genealogies, let alone a Gentile woman. But Ruth is in the genealogy of Jesus, and it specifically says Ruth. In chapter 2, we see the loyalty of a daughter-in-law. She's a beautiful character, inside and out. The men of that time liked their women to look good and be good. They valued their women being beautiful inside and beautiful outside. And she was full of humility, and yet she had a boldness about her, and she was full of loyalty and a serving heart. And she wasn't passive or an underdog. Quite often we tend to see passive underdogs being big in heart, but she wasn't passive and she wasn't an underdog. It began with the right choice. She not only chose to stay with Naomi, she chose Naomi's people and she chose Naomi's God. And she said, I've thought it through. I want to be one of your people and I want your God to be my God. And what a great set of choices that Ruth made. And the Lord was there for her in a real way. And even though she had seen him punish his people, she chose him. And she said, I will, 4 times to Naomi. It was almost like a marriage service, but the gist was, I will go with you. Loyalty and love in Hebrew are almost the same words. And God knows nothing of a love that isn't loyal. God's love is constantly loyal. And we see this throughout the Old Testament, where God's loyalty goes in immeasurably further than anybody else's loyalty would go. It's a covenant love, a love that will stick with you through thick and thin. Without loyalty, there isn't real love. And God values loyalty greatly. And Ruth found favour in the eyes of the Lord. She became one of God's favourites. And to have God's favour is greatly to be desired. And thus she became the talk of the town in Bethlehem. And it was said of her that the Lord had not stopped showing kindness to Ruth. And so everybody was talking about her. And so this brings us to the second half of the book, 2 influential men. It's a statement of loyalty and faith, which endures through all generations. And the loyalty that Ruth shows is soon put to test as Ruth goes out to glean a living, so to speak, but glean something to eat from strange fields. There in the field of Boaz, several patterns converge. Naomi has a plan which will obligate the kinsman to support her. Ruth has her own ideas which will, if realised, change her own position as well. And Boaz moves from an initial position of utter correctness and minimum courtesy to a granting of extra privileges which reflect a change within himself, of which he is fully aware at this point. So Boaz goes from a position of wanting to do what's right to really liking Ruth, and he knows it. Now we need to look here at a bit of Hebrew law. Boaz was a man of great standing and a man of good standing, and he rewarded Ruth for her loyalties. He said to his reapers, "Leave plenty for the Moabite woman." And the book of Leviticus comes into life here, and we often say, "Oh, we'll skip the book of Leviticus," but there's part of Leviticus's rules and regulations that come into line here, with its injunctions to leave part of the harvest for the needy, and with all of its concerns and compassion for the underprivileged within society. The text contains complexities, yet these fade away against the simple measure of a divine plan and the simple message of a divine plan, fulfilling itself among decent people. Ruth, Naomi and Boaz all occupy the stage in turn, and God's purpose is fulfilled through their actions. Boaz acknowledges Ruth's right to glean behind his handmaidens, and you can quite imagine it that there's a row of pickers who are for Boaz's people, and there's Ruth sort of 10 steps back, just scampering around, picking up what has been left by the pickers. But Boaz has told his people to intentionally leave a good amount for Ruth, and Ruth remains unmolested in his fields, which means that he's got a good integrity within his workforce, but he does not yet accede to her request to glean among the sheaves. By mealtime, he is a changed person. He's looking at Ruth and he's changing his mind. She is to eat with him. She may glean among the sheaves, and his men are to drop part of the harvest for Ruth to acquire. Ruth returns home with an ephah of barley, between 30 and 50 pounds, according to modern authorities. And Naomi realizes that their future might be brighter than she had dared hope, because what Boaz has allowed her to have is far in excess of what would normally be gained. The harvest comes to an end, and Naomi instructs Ruth in a new plan. She is to join Boaz at the threshing floor during the night vigil. The vigil had cultic and ceremonial significance, and Ruth's preparation for the night are preparations effectively of marriage. Whether or not the marriage was consummated on that night is debated, although the story is clear enough. The consummation took place after the marriage and was blessed by God with the son Obed. There are two strange customs in the book of Ruth. First, the law states that in the year of Jubilee, the 7th year, everything, the land, etc., reverts back to those who have owned it originally. And if a husband died before he had got his wife pregnant, then it was up to the brother. It was a duty of the brother to marry the widow and get her pregnant, giving her a son, to carry on the dead brother's line, and subsequently claim back the land which was lost in claim it back the land in Jubilee. So here we have Ruth, and there was some relative who was under an obligation to her to marry her and give her a son to keep her husband's line going, and so that the line would re-inherit the land which would come available in the year of Jubilee. That is what lies behind the Sadducees' question to Jesus. I'm sorry about me itching all the time. This is what's behind the Sadducees' question to Jesus about the woman who has 7 husbands and they all died, leaving her without a son. And it's down to the Sadducees not believing in life after death. That's why they were sad, you see. That's a terrible joke. Jesus told them that they go wrong because they don't know the scriptures, they don't understand the scriptures or the power of God. The second weird thing that we have to look at is a woman couldn't propose to a man in marriage in those days, but she was free to indicate that she would like to be married to someone, and she could do that in a number of ways. One of the ways was to warm a man's feet. Strange, bizarre, but it seemed to work for Ruth. And we find that Ruth went and laid at Boaz's feet and covered his feet with a cloak. And what she was saying was, I wouldn't mind being married to you. And she was free to do that because it was part of the custom of the day. But we also see Ruth sort of sneaking into the area where Boaz was sleeping, and when he wakes up early in the morning, he more or less tells her, sneak back out so nobody can see you, and we'll get this sorted. Boaz was very flattered by her desire, and he was very grateful to be chosen because he was neither the oldest nor the youngest. He was a fair bit older than Ruth, so he was flattered that she had chosen him, not one of his younger brothers. But his older brother was the one that technically should have fulfilled the legal duty of marrying Ruth and giving her a son. And he said, provided it's okay with my older brother, I would love to marry you. So he goes off, sorts it out, and his older brother says yes. The whole thrust of the narrative of Boaz as a redeemer of Obed, declared to be the son of Naomi, would lose its point had the relationship between Ruth and Boaz been anything other than proper and a marriage between equals. the court scene between Boaz and the other unnamed client, which we assume was his brother, establishes this as it resolves the underlying patterns with a happy ending. And time and history played another dimension into this pattern. The covenant of love between Boaz and Ruth reminds the people of Israel in times of exile and need that there is a similar covenant that exists between Israel and God. All of the story is brought to a successful conclusion. First, there is the matter of redeeming Elimelech's property, Naomi's only possibility of re-establishing herself in this land. The anonymous kinsman is anxious to purchase this land. Since Naomi has no male descendants, the property would have then become part of the permanent property of this land. But then Boaz reminds him that he's got an obligation to Ruth, and would he basically be part of that obligation? And he effectively declines, and he takes off his sandal and gives it to Boaz, which is a way of settling a deal. It's a matter of showing Boaz, you have the right to marry Ruth. And the son of that marriage would be assigned to Naomi, and the final outcome of the contracts would see the land revert to Naomi and her family. And Boaz happily accepts the privilege and obligation of marrying Ruth and raising the family of Naomi. Now, what was the Lord doing in all of this? We have looked at the human romance. It is a very beautiful story and a real rural romance. But God was doing something behind all of this. Well, he was preparing a royal line for Israel. And Ruth's right choice was becoming part of God's right choice. And she was going to be part of the royal line. There is another book in the Bible which is full of romance, and that's the book of Esther, which doesn't even mention God, but here God is frequently mentioned. Most of the time in this book, you find other people calling on the Lord to bless Ruth. Naomi said, "The Lord bless you, Ruth, for being with me." Boaz says, "The Lord bless you, Ruth, for choosing me over my brothers." And everybody is saying to her, "The Lord bless you." And they meant it. And they're using God's name, Yahweh. Whenever you see in the Old Testament the word Lord, in the original text it says Yahweh. And it's so awkward for us to pronounce that they transposed it with the word Lord. So when you see that, you know that people are calling on the name of the Lord. One of the closest words to Yahweh is always. Always my provider, always my helper, always my healer. You are always. And all of Jesus's names, and there's about 250 names which Jesus has. The best is yes. So we have a God called Always and his son called Yes. You can't get more positive in terms of faith than that. So Ruth came into a vital line of a family tree. Because Boaz was a direct descendant of Judah, one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Judah means praise. Judah to me and you, but Judah to the Hebrew nation. Which means that he was a direct descendant of Tamar. Remember the incestuous rape of Tamar? God has a way of putting things right through the generations. God can even use these people and this situation to produce Jesus when they make the right choices. And Jacob makes a dying promise to Judah. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs. And this was many years before there was even a thought of a king. And yet here is Jacob promising Judah that one day a royal line would come from the line of Judah, and Bethlehem would be the capital. Bethlehem, the house of bread, the place of where the corn grew. And Micah said, Bethlehem of Judea, you are not the least of the princes of Judea, for out of you shall come, and on we go with the story of Jesus. And it all ties together. In the book of Ruth, there is an extraordinary little bit of information that when Judah came into the promised land, Judah actually conquered and took the city of Jerusalem. On the border between the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Judah, Judah took Jerusalem. It was a fortified city at the time, but Judah managed to take it. And then lovingly they gave it to the tribe of Benjamin, who lost it. And there's a royal line which is coming to Bethlehem. But there's also this city of Jerusalem coming into the picture slowly, which David would later take as to make his capital. You can begin to see the threads which are working together. There's a purpose being worked here out. And Judah should have kept Jerusalem, ideally, and not give it away to be lost. And by now, Jerusalem was a pagan city again, and it's a tragic story, and things are slowly beginning to come together. Hi Cameron, welcome from Australia. We're talking through the book of Ruth. Boaz's grandmother was not a Jew either. Her name was Rahab. She was the prostitute in Jericho who hid the soldiers in the roof, and subsequently was the only family saved in the conquest of Jericho. So this is a very mixed up family. There's Tamar, who was raped, Rahab, who was a prostitute, Ruth, who was a Moabite, a Gentile, and yet these all figure in the family tree of Jesus. Isn't that amazing? How many of us thought that Jesus was a Jew through and through, with no scandal attached to his ancestry. And here we have all of this being shown to us as we track through the ancestry of Jesus, going through all of the stories that are important to God. Now we return to who wrote Judges and Ruth and why. You may remember that I said right at the beginning of 3 weeks ago, I would tell you who wrote the book of Judges and Ruth. As in the whole Bible, the end of the book often reveals its purpose. And the statement that there was no king in Israel in those days means that the book of Judges, and therefore the book of Ruth, was written after they got a king. So you are talking to a people who now have a king, and you can talk about a time before they had a king. It is also obvious from the end of the book of Ruth, giving David's royal line. And Jesse was the father of David. It does not say Jesse was the father of David the king. It just says Jesse was the father of David, which is really interesting. Here we have mention of David, and yet he is not the king at the time. Because if he was king, it would have said Jesse was the father of David the king. But it just says Jesse was the father of David. And that's the final line of the book, which is quite incredible in its sense. So we can begin to say when this book was written. It was written when Saul was king. It was written when Saul was the first king of Israel and is on the throne. Saul is, if you remember, the people's choice. And they chose him because he stood head and shoulders above everybody else. They chose him for his height. They chose him for his stature. They chose him for his good looks and his physical appearance. What a big mistake. Now, if we know when this whole thing was written, we know who wrote it. It reads like the speeches of Samuel. The first book of Samuel is identical language to the book of Judges and the book of Ruth. In fact, Samuel loved to summarize their history in just this way. And there is one sermon in the book of Samuel which is almost identical, and it almost condenses, it's almost a condensed version of the book of Judges. So who wrote this? Samuel wrote it. The prophet Samuel wrote the book of Judges and the book of Ruth. And he wrote them as one book when Saul was king. Now, which tribe did Saul come from? He came from the tribe of Benjamin. So we can now see the whole message of the book. Basically, tribe of Benjamin is bad stock. And we need to look to Bethlehem. In other words, this whole thing was written to prepare the people to switch from Saul to David, because Samuel had secretly anointed David already, and he knew he was going to be the next king. How can I prepare the people to accept David as king rather than having Saul's line continue? It's a pretty good piece of propaganda writing. He says, look what sort of blood Benjamin is. They are the pits. Just look at them. Look at what happens to them. They are the lowest of the low. But now, look at the people, the lovely people of Bethlehem. Look at this lovely family. And he creates this loving, wonderful family. This book was most likely written to get people to change their loyalties from the tribe of Benjamin to the tribe of Judah. It's preparation for this person who he mentions in the very last words of the book. And Jesse was the father of David. But Samuel knew David was God's appointed king. And he was going to change the whole situation. God plans long term. And that's one of the reasons why we have difficulties in understanding God's plan or in seeing God's plan for our lives and for the people of our generation. Because God's looking long term, so he can effectively start something and put in the ancestor of Goliath a couple of books ahead of where Goliath is going to appear, just as a link back to the past. How does a Christian use the book of Judges and of Ruth? Individual Christians can learn a great deal from the characters in the book of Judges. We can learn negatively from the mistakes that people make, as well as from the right choices that they make. We can learn to not do the things that they did and to do the things that give them the good outcome. And we can learn a lot from looking at Gideon, Samuel, Deborah and Barak. They are all witnesses who are effectively watching us now to see how we run our race. But the church needs to study Judges, because the church can get into the same kind of anarchy, and the church can get into the same solution to the anarchy by looking for a visible king. The tribe, the Jewish people were looking for a visible king when they already had a king. They were looking for a man to follow when they had a God who was with them and showing them the way. This is fatal, following men. We've got a king, and if we do what's right in his eyes, the church would be united tomorrow. But we follow men. We follow our leaders these days, and we follow Calvinism and all these different types of ideas and ideologies, when we realistically need to be following God and following his ideology, his rules and regulations, his love for his people. We are following men instead of doing what is right in God's sight. And God is the same God that we have yesterday, today, and always. We can learn a lot from the book of Ruth. We are Ruth. We are Gentile, unless you're a Jew listening to this. We are Gentiles. but we have come into the people of God and into the royal line. I'm in the royal family of God. You are in the royal family of God, because in Christ you are royal. You are a prince or a princess. Hold your head up. Walk tall. Walk as royal. Yeah, that would have come out better. Walk as royalty. You are in the royal line. You are Gentiles. You were far from the Commonwealth of Israel. You were right outside. And God has brought you right into his royal line. Not before Jesus, but after him. And Ruth is us. And Boaz is Jesus. And we have got married. We have a marriage, a covenant. And he's brought us right into the line of the people of God. We are the bride of Christ, and Jesus is our bridegroom. The whole Bible is a romance, and it finishes with a wedding. The Ruth-Boaz romance is the perfect picture of Christ and his Gentile bride. It's exciting. It's amazing seeing back then us. Christ tells us to look for him in the Old Testament. And here we have an absolute picture of Christ marrying his bride, Christ marrying the Gentile girl and bringing her into a family line, a royal family line. And we are the Gentiles. We are Ruth. And we see the story completely turning around. Here's Ruth and Naomi destitute at the beginning of this book. And we have Ruth and Naomi with a house and a line and land which they've deserved. It's been brought back. It's been restored to them. And their line goes on and carries on into the line of Jesus. And it's Ruth that is mentioned in the genealogy. It's Ruth that is mentioned as the link to that past. But we can see how the genealogy of Jesus goes right the way back to Abraham and Noah and Adam. And this is the reasoning why we must read the books of the Bible in their entirety. But once you've got an understanding of the whole of the Old Testament and the New Testament, but we're talking here about the Old Testament, we can see in the Old Testament the line that works its way upwards to Jesus. And we see book on book on book the family of Jesus, which is following right the way through. We see God starting with the family of Abraham, and before that, but we'll concentrate on Abraham, and we starting with the family, and it builds and it builds, and it builds to this massive scene of loads of people in an exodus and what have you. And then it comes down to look at a family again. And then it goes back up and comes back down to look at a family again. and it's a tremendous story. And the more you read, the more you look at things, the more you understand the genealogy, the more the Bible comes to life. Andrea, there's someone at the door. Andrea, excuse me a second. I knew that was going to happen. It really gives us an excitement about the Bible. I get excited when I learn new things, and you only learn new things by reading through and studying the Bible. And there are lots and lots of preachers that give good messages, but there's nothing like studying the Bible. Study it for yourself. Look at it through different eyes. I quite often with the Old Testament will look at the Jewish traditions and what the Jews say. And you'll see in my writing, my talks mention of rabbis and different things. Look at it from their point of view. Look at it from the point of view of what we're doing now, and get as much information to put around it so that you get an overall picture. But it's a fascinating book, and it's exciting when you realize that different people's ancestors pop up in different places, and it's no coincidence. If you tried to look at the Bible and say that it's a coincidence, all of these people being mashed together, it would be impossible. So we see here the inspired word of God concentrating on families and a people and a nation, and then back to families. It's a fantastic resource that I think everybody should study and read. But I absolutely love the Bible, and I'm getting more and more to really enthuse about what's in the Bible. The more and more I read it. Well, I've waffled on a bit, apart from zipping out to get the door. I'll leave you this morning, and we've just done the book of Judges and Ruth. I don't know what's going to come next week. I haven't decided, or rather I haven't been told by God what we'll be doing. So next week will be a surprise. God bless. Bye.